Good morning, everyone. Today is April 2nd, day after April Fools, April 2nd, 2024. This is the House Democratic Caucus for all those who aren't in the room. Got another snowstorm coming. Yay. Just thought I'd have to mention that because I knew you were all thrilled waiting to get out to the slopes. Okay, so I have just a few announcements, very few announcements. I'm going to make a few announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to three different bill reporters, chairs, bills, and they're going to update you on amendments that are coming today. Okay, so as you all heard, we're back to the floor. Gosh, somebody will correct me if it was different, but in the leadership meeting this morning, we're back on the floor at 12:45, right? Okay, want to make sure. We have been asked to remind people who are speaking on the floor, whether you are reporting a bill, whether you're doing it during interrogation or anything, make sure you address the speaker. All your comments go through the speaker, and you should also face the speaker. And so there's been a lot of people telling us, hey, people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. So we're giving you that reminder. If anybody needs any like pointers or help with that, let us know, let leadership know, or go to John Bartholomew, who leads our rules group. But do make sure that you address your comments always through the speaker. Thanks for that. So the comments are to speak up more clearly, yeah. So it's a good reminder. Thank you, Representative Austin. And there's I'm actually gonna, would you grab the microphone and hand it to Representative Emmons while I say this, because I want to follow up, because she wants to say something too, but I want to follow up on Representative Austin's comments were for those who didn't hear it. Thank you for that. There are pockets in the room where you can't hear very well. And one of them is where I sit. And sometimes it is really hard to hear certain people. And it's not because they're not speaking near their microphone, but it is because the room has strange acoustics. So everyone should make an effort to speak louder than you think is appropriate. Make sure the microphone is pointing to you. We spend a lot of time telling your neighbor to move the microphone when you're speaking over to your face. So make sure you do that, because that is really helpful, because there are a lot of times when people have a hard time hearing. And remember, those microphone boxes have a plug-in for earbuds. If you're having problems, throw in a pair of earbuds. It makes it a lot better if you're having a hard time hearing a report. So just saying all that. Representative Emmons, Dean of the House wants to say something.
I do. This is one of my bugaboos, but it really goes back into the decorum. It's points of order. If you're speaking and there's a point of order called on you, you no longer have the floor. The person who's called the point of order now has the floor. You need to sit down. You no longer have the floor. The speaker has not recognized you anymore to speak. If you're being interrogated or you interrogate someone, there's two of you up on the floor and there's a point of order called, neither one of you have the floor anymore and you need to sit. The only person that can stand is the one who has called the point of order. And the reason for that is the speaker is the only one that can rule on a point of order. We don't make the ruling, it is the speaker. If you're still standing when a point of order has been called on you, your inclination is to respond. And we started seeing that last week, where a few members that had a point of order called on them were still standing, and they started to respond on the point of order. The speaker is the only one that can rule on the point of order. So it's really important. Sit down if a point of order has been called on you. It just keeps keeps the emotions level on the floor, which is really important.
Thank you very much, Representative Emmons. Dean of the House. And if anyone has any questions about rules, I promise you she can answer them. And please take advantage of the fact that if you see her having lunch or something, we know how busy she is as chair, but thank you for that. Okay. Real quickly, I want to just remind everybody, you might not have seen the email, but Sorsha, who's the assistant in the Ways and Means Committee, has sent an email out with sharing an opportunity at 9 a.m. on Thursday for anyone who wants to share ideas that they have around education finance. It's going to be here, I believe, over in 270 in the pavilion. But look at that email, Representative Jerome. Yes, it's that one, I believe, is somebody who on Ways and Means can correct me, but I'm pretty sure it's for Thank you. And is it also in conjunction with Ed Committee as well? There you go. It's a joint. I didn't even know that. Thank you for telling me. For legislators to share their thoughts and ideas around it. And they're looking forward to you. So go ahead. If you are interested in speaking, you should reply to that email and let her know, because they're signing people up for a period of time to share. So anyway, wanted to make sure everyone knew about that. And last thing, you'll all remember, or most of you will remember, that we normally do a State House photo of all of us. That is coming again. It is being worked on. Stay tuned for the details, but we normally do it out on the steps, and there's some thoughts about whether we try to do it in the chamber again. It used to be done in the chamber. So stay tuned, pay attention. We want everybody here when that happens. So when you hear that date, we'll send it out immediately. I don't think we've confirmed it with a photographer, but they're working on it. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Okay. First up is Representative McCarthy and Shay Evans, or just Shay Evans. There you go. We've got, sorry, I'm gonna pull this up with my glasses. We got the ethics bill, which is H875. And you're gonna speak to amendment.
I sure am. Representative Shay Waters Evans from Charlotte. Don't know if you've heard about this ethics bill, but we are still going. We heard 2 amendments this morning. The first was from Representative Brennan Harrison and Ajala, I believe I'm saying that correctly. And it is essentially, it removes section 22, most of section 22. And all of section 23 from the bill. I'm going to tell you, don't worry, you don't have to remember what they are. So those sections are relating to municipal training, and it removes the requirement for ethics training. It removes the requirement for an ethics liaison between a municipality and the State Ethics Commission. It removes any enforcement or record keeping or municipal officer designation, that person who has to report back to the State Ethics Commission. It removes the obligation to hear complaints or do investigations, to report or record any of those things. It also removes the whistleblower protection for citizens in a town. It removes the ability for them to bring a civil action against an officer who is in violation of the ethics code. And it also removes the provision where a municipality can have supplemental or additional ethics policies should they wish to do so. So, most of the bill. So we voted on it in a straw poll in our committee, and the motion was to find it favorable, and we voted 2-9-1 against finding it favorable, which means that we voted no and would like for you to as well on that amendment. The next amendment was from Representative Shaw, and it was deleting section 16. I'm sure in all the excitement on the floor on Friday, you might have forgotten that section 16 is the one that strikes out part of a sentence that says that the the executive director of the State Ethics Commission would be a part-time employee. It just removes that section that says that person is part-time. It says it serves at the pleasure of the commission, that position is. So it's not removing the position. It's not maintaining that it's part-time or full-time. All it's doing is still saying that position exists and then can be funded in the future, depending on what that appropriation is. This amendment, the Shaw amendment, would reinstate it to where it was before, which would designate it as a part-time position. The motion in committee was favorable to find it favorable this morning, and we voted on a straw poll, 3-8-1 to find it unfavorable, which means we voted no, and would like for you to do so as well.
Thank
All right, so if you do have questions, make sure you reach out to Representative Shea, Waters, Evans to get the answers to your questions immediately, or anybody else on the committee. Coming up on the floor this afternoon, as everything else is. So I didn't check with who's going next, but since you're close, I'll just say both of you are coming up. We have miscellaneous ed, which is 874. 874 miscellaneous ed on the floor this afternoon. There's a couple amendments. So Representative Brady and Representative Conlon will be speaking to these amendments. Send you up here.
Good morning, everybody.
Quick overview of the bill. We're really trying to take the toolbox metaphor so far in house education. So this miscellaneous ed bill is like a messy shelf in the garage. It's not really a toolbox. It's a mix of things. One section is the first chunk of the bill deals with the adult ed and literacy program and some changes with high school completion, folding those two together based on work of a study committee that we commissioned last year. The next piece, perhaps, according to Google, the most useful tool is a cordless drill. So perhaps the cordless drill in the bill is continuing the community schools competitive grant program. So this is amending something we passed in 2021 where we created a competitive grant program for community schools. There are 5 pilots that are up and running and quite frankly, remarkable. I think some of the most incredible testimony we've received in House Ed. The program from the state point of view would wind down this year if we do nothing. And so this is moving essentially money that's already in the ed fund to keep $1 million going towards community schools for the next year and to try to get a better, to study a bit more what this model might look like if we were to scale it more across the state. Community schools, I'll talk about this more on the floor, but we're not talking about a single program or building. It's an approach to schooling. It's bringing in social services. It's weaving together a lot of things that, though we are sort of at the same time bemoaning them all being in the ed fund, if the reality is that schools are doing more and more, these are schools that are doing it really well. They're able to draw down more federal dollars. They're able to really wrap around students. They're seeing some incredible data, especially around engagement and attendance, which if you read the New York Times last week, is a massive national problem right now. So that's one part of the bill. There's a small piece, couple other sections, other members of our committee will report on related to schools offering or informing students of military careers and options as part of their post-secondary planning. There's a really fun section that Representative Toof is going to present called Dead Last to try to understand why we are dead last in the country in terms of number of post-secondary graduates potentially staying in Vermont, just a study. And finally, a kind of binding homework assignment for us that we will continue to look at the entire flexible pathways provision within, that was Act 77 that was passed in 2013. So as this part of our education landscape becomes more entrenched, taking a closer look at what's working, what's not, how are we using those dollars, where's the best return on investment, et cetera. So that's the whole bill. Oh, sorry, there's one other uniform chart of accounts making, we got rid of the common technology for all of that last year, but this is putting in statute that we do have a uniform chart of accounts and ways for schools to report categories of spending. So that's the whole messy shelf in the garage. There are multiple amendments. One is the appropriations amendment that deals, of course, with funding. And we found that favorable, 741. No, nope, sorry, wrong amendment count. We found that favorable, 1011. Got ahead of myself. Okay. The next amendment, you're going to speak to.
Good morning, everybody. Representative Holcomb has an amendment, which you can see in the calendar, and it essentially says that if a school closes, that they would need to designate up to 3 public schools for those students to attend. Let me just say at the outset, despite the vote on this, and I'll explain that in a second, this is in fact a very important issue as we move into this funding crisis that we are in. I think that the sort of prospect of schools closing, we've already seen it in Rochester, is a real one, and one that needs to be thought about much more strategically than we have in the past, much more about how these changes affect the ed fund and sort of where the money from the ed fund goes. So it's an issue our committee takes very seriously. It is one that is represented in a bill that's on our wall, H634, that we plan to take up. We are already scheduling testimony on that, and we do have a vehicle to return that to the Senate should we want to. When we heard Representative Holcomb present to us on the amendment, she said, and quote, "We need to have a data-informed discussion." And I'd say our committee agrees with that on both counts. We need to have that discussion, and we're already lining up testimony on H634. And we also need to have the data to assure that such things as closure, making sure that it is in fact something that could be done. In other words, does every school that might be vulnerable or even isn't vulnerable, but something could be on the horizon, do they have that public alternative available that it both has capacity and is within a reasonable distance from a school? So we really want to have this conversation, and we really want to have the data. So we voted with sort of those thoughts in mind to find the amendment unfavorable by a 7-4-1 vote. Second amendment, Representative Brady will take care of.
All right, the next amendment is essential. This is from Representative Christie, and it is essentially taking H523 and putting it on the bill as an amendment. This deals with our HHB, our hazing, harassment, and bullying statutory framework. Is a very complex legal area. I spent 2 hours, hour and a half on the phone with Ledge Counsel this morning trying to focus my thinking. I'm going to the amendment would change the definition of harassment. And I'm going to just share a couple things from some testimony around the legal framework that unfortunately, or just exists in our world right now that we have to that we had to consider when voting on this amendment. And particularly a court decision that came down at the very end of December, just before we came into session. So Vermont's Federal District Court issued a lengthy decision outlining constitutional concerns with Vermont's current statutory protection for Vermont students from harassment. In the Block decision, the court squarely criticized portions of the current definition that by its terms, prohibit conduct or speech in cases where no measurable educational impact exists. The December 2023 decision declared that the AOE's model policy for the prevention of HHB was likely unconstitutional, observing specifically that its harassment definition prohibits speech engaged for a prohibited purpose, even if that speech has no measurable educational impact. We're existing within the larger constitutional framework here of free speech, which is different in schools. And there's a lot of precedent around that. So the existing HHB statutes and protections for students in Vermont are potentially at risk given recent legal decisions. And we are just starting to get our heads around that in committee. And there's a context here that we can't ignore. There's a national legal legal advocacy group that's bringing multiple suits in Vermont over the past 18 months based on alleged First Amendment violations, all testing our harassment protections, and we can probably expect further challenges. In essence, this recent district court decision sort of put us on notice that we could be potentially headed down the road of invalidating portions or even the entirety of our existing framework. So perhaps we need to work to really tighten what we have before we lose it all and before we expand or change it, as Representative Christie's amendment proposes. This is a hard issue. The committee has spent time on it in prior years and legally very complex to deal with in an amendment. And so the committee vote on this, we voted, how did you want to, we voted to find it unfavorable on a vote of 10-2.
My question is about adult literacy, and I was wondering if that portion of the bill, if there was going to be, I think there's 5 distinct adult literacy organizations in the state, and whether that part of the bill addressed that at all to sort of reduce overhead and make it into one.
The bill does not address that as
Okay.
is, but perhaps we shall try in the Senate.
Okay, thanks.
You, Representative Troyanos from Standard. Oh, okay. Better. Okay. I have a loud voice anyway, but, okay. So, on the community school grants, we had a brief conversation about that. So my question is that the original grant had provisions for parental, input, when moving, things into the schools. I'm wondering if that remains.
The only thing that this would change is just simply getting rid of the end date, and so
Okay.
allows competitive grants to go forward.
Great.
But would also mean that if we don't fund it, then it just sits there as a grant
Okay.
program that is unfunded.
Right.
The 5 pillars of community schools, the reason they are such a sort of innovative model, and really Vermont is doing this in a rural context where it's generally been done in really large urban districts, it is a sort of wraparound. It's integrated student supports, expanding and enriching learning time and opportunities. So this is after school stuff. This is summer stuff, active family and community engagement. There's some really neat stuff happening in a few of our communities, getting people into the buildings and going out and bringing educators into the community, collaborative leadership and practices, and safe, inclusive, and equitable learning environments. And I'm happy to talk offline about some of the really specific things that some of our highest poverty rural schools are doing in regards to those areas, but it doesn't change the grant program.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'll assume I'm next since I'm next to the microphone. Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury. I'm wondering about the issue of closing schools, whether data exists about sort of the collateral impacts of that. So on the community, over time, whether having kids go to other schools that are more distant, what sort of economic impact that has. You know, is there data like that? Are you going to be looking for data like that? There is, I don't think, any data that talks about it in that sort of broad sense of, quote, what's the community impact of a school closing? I know that, or I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that there's been studies done in Maine as when they went through a consolidation, but this really isn't about closing schools. This is about provisions for if a community decides or a school district decides to close a school, where those children go. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Just on public school closure too, I was just wondering, Rep. Logan Nicole from Ludlow. I guess I'm just wondering if you're intending to look at whether closing schools is actually cost effective. I feel like it's kind of an idea that we just assume it's going to save money, but in practice, it hasn't actually saved a lot of money.
So we're getting into kind of the bigger conversation here. This is really about this amendment is about something very specific. But to answer that question, I would say that, as we look to kind of get our arms around and wrestle our current educational system and financing system, and get sort of control and understanding of it, I think those are questions that are going to need to be discussed and asked, probably by a lot of people. And yes, come on Thursday if you want to bring suggestions to our joint hearing.
Representative Angela Arsenault from Williston, just a quick potential correction to the record. I'm not aware of Rochester school closing. You said Rochester. Did you mean Roxbury?
I did mean Roxbury. Thank you.
I just, since it's
Yeah.
a public
But I
caucus,
will say
wanted to
that,
correct.
Rochester High School and Middle School did close a few
Yes,
years
a
ago.
few years
Thank
ago.
you. Yeah. And it's not the first time I've done that. I appreciate it.
Jay Hooper, Brookfield, Braintree, Randolph, Granville, and Roxbury. Is it Roxbury that inspired this amendment or a different thing?
You'd have to ask the amendment sponsor. However, Roxbury would not fall into this. Roxbury is not an independent
Right.
district. They have a place for all their kids to go within their own school district.
If you have any questions, please reach out to either of them or anyone on. All right, we have one more bill, 829. I know this one because we've talked about it before, but I'll let you call anybody up who goes with you. I don't know if there is any. Representative Stevens.
No, they're tired of me. HA 29 is the housing bill that has a lot of money in it and tax increases in it. We've received 3 amendments, two of which are in the calendar this morning, one from Representative McFawn, one from Representative Small and others. And then there's a third one that we'll talk about briefly this morning from Representative Bloomley and others. These amendments propose, I'll start with Representative McFawn's amendment, which may be withdrawn, but we'll wait and see if that actually happens. His amendment was about trying to segregate funds or to separate funds from the appropriation to VHCB this year. Again, money is way down. And so the appropriation to VHCB to provide to other nonprofit housing organizations to build needed housing is only $7.3 million over their statutory give, or the give that we're giving them through the property transfer tax and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. Representative McFawn is very passionate about housing for those with developmental disabilities. He's been fighting for this his whole career. Since Brandon, right after Brandon Training School was closed, there was an immediate blush of activity that provided actually quite a substantial number of units in the 10 years following Brandon's closing. But since then, like a lot of the housing issues, the money's dried up and the focus shifted away, because we do one project, and in this case, it was 600 units over 10 years. But we generally tend to go, oh, we did a project, and at least in my hometown or my town, it takes another 10 years before another project gets done. And that's in the developmental disability with their families. Parents are getting older. It's getting much more difficult to take care of their children who are now adults. And so there's been a real push this year about providing more housing and developing more housing for those with developmental disabilities. And actually this started many years ago. And there was a bill 2 years ago that allowed for some planning grants to be done and some pilots. People applied for pilot programs, and there's 3 pilot programs that are now in play at varying stages of development. What Representative McFawn wanted to do was to take $1.5 million from this low appropriation to VHCB and call it a set aside for these 3 projects, and that this money would always be there for them when they were ready to produce their work. That, and we voted against this. I'll just be upfront. We voted against this. We found this unfavorable 731 because, first of all, the way the funding works with VHCB has made developmental disability housing a priority in their pool of priorities. Number two, these projects are already in the works. This year, there's a project that's going to be attached to a affordable housing project in Waterbury that's going to have 4 units that are going to be run or serviced by the Upper Haven. And that was the first pilot project. And VHCB has already committed money to that project and has promised that if it does run over, that they will cover all expenses in any overage, any construction overage. The second project is in Burlington or in Chittenden County. CHT is just about ready to file an application to VHCB to start their funding process. Developing affordable housing of any kind is a lengthy process. It takes the planning grant. It takes the construction planning. It takes financial package planning and then of course all the local zoning things that need to happen. So CHT is at the cusp of putting their program in. And then there's a third project that's proposed to be in Moncton, which is a little bit harder to do because it's going to be a group home situation. The developmental disability families have really worked hard to say, we need choices. We need to be, not everybody can live in a group home. Not everybody can live by themselves without the services. And so these 3 pilots, which are really going to be important for providing housing moving forward, are happening. And so but the concept of setting aside the funds is actually detrimental to getting housing done in other areas today. And so the money will always be the way that VHCB is, and especially if 829 passes and the funding scheme passes in here, there will be money that comes into VHCB every year that would be able to be put toward these projects. So we try to really emphasize that the projects are, number one, happening, and number two, will happen with the fact that these are priorities for VHCB and for the local nonprofit housing organizations. It was a really long and emotional conversation. Representative McFawn was very passionate about this, rightfully so. And it was, but it took us a long time to get the hearing, get a hearing done. And again, we ended up voting to find this unfavorable by a 7-3-1 vote. It may be withdrawn. Second amendment is the small amendment. It's small and the progressives from the Chittenden County area. And what they're doing, they're generally upset that charter changes that passed over the last several years regarding getting rid of no-cause evictions it hasn't been dealt with. And I don't think they haven't been voted on. They haven't been dealt with. They've been in government operations committee where they go when they're voted on. The difficulty in getting rid of no cause eviction without any further balances being done to landlord tenant law is that it will knock everything out of balance that exists right now. Landlord tenant law is, like Act 250, a third rail issue, and dealing with property owners, landlords, tenants, and tenants' rights is a subject that is very much a part of our committee and has been for many, many, many years. When we introduced a bill that would have asked for an eviction moratorium this year for no cause evictions, the pushback we got from the community was large, because there are many people who say, in our desire to try to balance public policy with private property, landlords were able to say, how come I can't get rid of people when I need to get rid of them if they can't be, if the contract has ended? And of course, tenants and tenants' rights organizations feel like once you're in housing, it's your right to stay in housing as long as you are not destroying property or breaking any of the laws that you have set up. There's a big chasm there. And so merely by trying to get rid of the no cause eviction policy that's in law, there are plenty of just causes for people to be evicted. It's a very emotional issue. Through the pandemic, when we were paying people's rent and when we were paying back rent, the number of evictions for non-payment of rent went way down. And then on a percentage basis, the percentage of evictions for no cause went way up because landlords felt like they had no other way of getting rid of tenants. And the problem isn't just saying for problematic tenants. We know that tenants were being evicted for a number of different reasons that were classified as no cause. Again, very difficult, especially in Chittenden County where there's a large density of renters. And, but the issue is not one on a process level, especially to be done on the floor of the House during this period of time. It is just way too complex. It is way too imbalanced to just simply say we're getting rid of this policy without taking the hours and hours of testimony that it usually takes to work on any kind of landlord tenant law in our committee. So we voted against this bill 624. Which leads us to the third amendment, which is being presented by Representative Bloomley, which proposes a work group or summer study. I'm not sure what do you call it, Representative? A work group, and it is a work group because and in the case of saying, oh, we're just kicking the can down the road with a summer work group, I really want to point out if we have, as proposed in this amendment, to have 12 meetings with the people who are in this group. That is so many hours that we do not have during the session to work on this issue with the stakeholders across the table. And the goal is to have up to 12 meetings with the stakeholders focusing solely on causes of eviction. There's a proposal that was in a bill in the Senate that didn't come across that would have had 6 meetings that talked about landlord tenant issues without any kind of direction, which we didn't care for. But with this focus on this particular issue, it gives us a head start towards what we really want to do in housing in general, which is to say that, like Act 250, landlord tenant law needs to be looked at and it needs to be modernized in some ways, and it needs to take into account the same things we talk about with Act 250. There's rural, there's urban, there's suburban, there's all these different areas of ownership and of tenancies that need to be looked at, and the way that the judiciary has or hasn't been able to support landlords or tenants. It's going to be a long conversation. And so I appreciate the fact that, having this many hours in this particular proposal is actually a gift for us to have that much time to focus solely on this one particular issue. So that amendment's going to come up. That'll be in, if it's not already in your email boxes, that'll be there. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mike McCarthy, Chair of House GovOps and Military Affairs, and represent St. Albans. So I want to support the great work that House General has done with H 829, and want to address the concern about the charter change proposals that are currently in House GovOps and Military Affairs. So I think a lot of us were here last biennium when we took up Burlington's just cause eviction charter proposal. And I was the assistant majority leader at the time. I served on GovOps at the time. I worked on the bill in committee, helped support the bill. And it was a lot of tough conversations for a lot of the reasons that Chair Stevens has talked about. Tenant and landlord policy can kind of be a third rail. And we worked really hard to put some guardrails on the Burlington policy, just for Burlington, in that charter bill last biennium, and still couldn't quite get the votes to override the governor's veto. I don't think that the governor's position has changed on this particular policy, whether it applies to one town or is a policy that would just be slapped on statewide without a lot of testimony. So I will certainly be supporting the committee and voting no on an amendment to just adopt a no cause policy. But I think the characterization that this amendment somehow solves the fact that we have not yet, and I want to say we have not yet moved forward on just cause eviction policies for the towns that have voted them in. There are a whole slew of reasons for that, both political and policy. This is not the solution to that. And my committee took some testimony on this issue and relationship to the charter changes last year of this biennium. We spoke with the reps from the towns that have voted, that's Winooski and Burlington, and in a slightly different way, the town of Essex, to have some of these eviction policies in place. And I think that we need to make some of the changes to the judiciary to have a balanced policy before we put these in place. Or we need to have a really thorough conversation and set the table so that we can go all the way and actually be successful in implementing these policies for the towns that have voted them in. But the table was not set for that well this biennium. And I know there's frustration in those communities, and I know some of that's been directed at the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee. I still stand by the fact that this wasn't the year to move those, and that this particular amendment, if it's a response to the fact that we haven't passed those charters, it is a response that is not great policy, that's not totally thought through, that hasn't had the kind of thoughtful process that Chair Stevens talked about. And it's just not an answer to that. That is not what this amendment really is. So I'll be voting no, and I hope other folks will support Tom's committee.
And just to follow up on that before we get to Representative Austin, I just want to say, I've gotten a lot of emails because my district is Washington-Chittenden. So I've gotten a lot of the Chittenden County emails on this particular issue. And one of the point that's made, and it's roughly the same email again and again and again, but one of the points made is, well, the rest of the state doesn't want this. And so our 4 towns should be allowed to have it because it's those 3 plus now Montpelier voted for it this year. And I just want to say, on a policy like this, there's many policies that fit like this. Making it applicable to only a few towns is counter to what we need to have a strong and uncomplicated policy for what is a very complicated issue. If landlords are allowed to own buildings in every town, and they do own buildings everywhere. So are we telling landlords that they have to have this set of rules in this community, but not in that community? Are we telling tenants that, yes, you lived in a town that had that didn't have no cause evictions, but then when you move, all of a sudden they do? It's a difficult trade being a landlord, a property owner, and living in as a tenant. And so this just completely would upend and be disruptive to what's already a very difficult process for the people who need. It's not that we are ignoring the needs of tenants here. We passed last year in S100 the upstream eviction prevention policy that didn't get funded. We funded it in the House, it didn't get funded in the Senate. We funded it again in the BAA and it didn't get funded. We're putting it in 829 again. It is a pilot program for full representation. It is a pilot program for, it's not a pilot program, it's a return to the CRF programs for the back payment of rent. And there's going to be through CVOEO, a statewide soft landing program to commiserate with people who are getting evicted. So there are pieces in place that of course now need money. And had we funded it last year, we would be talking about expanding the pilot rather than trying to get it underway. And our committee made this choice last year that rather than trying to negotiate with property owners to find out what the best way to get rid of no cause eviction, which is one of the few ways they feel that they have to get rid of problematic tenants, the next best thing was to provide these programs for tenants. And our testimony has been that these are successful programs. Not only were they successful in the state of Vermont in 2020 and 2021, but the representation programs have been successful in all the municipalities of reducing evictions by 50 to 70%. So those programs actually keep people out of evictions, period. And it's really important that we fund those. And that, again, that kind of sidesteps this idea that no cause eviction should be eradicated.
Rep. Austin from Colchester. I might have missed it. Did you say what the vote was out of your committee on Representative Bloomley's amendment?
We have not heard it yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
When this short caucus is over, we're going to. And I didn't hear any of the musicians say 25 or 624 was our vote today. So I'm just,
Wait, were you singing a Chicago song?
yeah.
Um,
Thank you. That justifies my age. Yeah.
Representative Barbara Rachelson, Burlington. So we're talking about just cause evictions, not no cause evictions.
No, that is a fundamental issue here. We are talking about getting rid of or having a moratorium and then working towards getting rid of no cause evictions. Okay,
And
just
having
cause
just
evictions exist. There's at least 5 cases of, or there's at least 5 levels of just cause evictions. But when people think it's just, we're talking about just cause evictions, we're actually talking about getting rid of no cause evictions.
So when I was looking into this, when Burlington was taking the vote, I know that several states have been doing it and municipalities since like the first one was like in the 1970s, the 1980s. So we do have a lot of data on how it is working and what other laws need to be in place. And I guess I'm wondering if when your committee takes it up, there's the eviction lab, I think at Princeton. So I just keep continuing to hear about this as an evidence-based policy. And I'm wondering how we can sort of keep focused on the evidence and whenever it's moving forward.
We have looked at things like the eviction labs, and the issue, besides the fact that, again, talking about someone's private property, taking away private property rights to create other rights is very touchy for a lot of people. When we go outside of the state, like the eviction lab, we have to just check the credibility of the information as it's produced. The eviction lab would say that, I was looking at the legal aid did a study on evictions in Vermont from 2019. At that time, there were 1,700 evictions the year before in Vermont. And that was data taken from court records. Eviction lab had it as 39. So trying to understand and sort through, yes, it would be part of the process of talking about this, but understanding where other laws fit from other states with ours is important to understand as we move forward. It's almost the equivalent of data collection.
Hi, State Representative Carol Odie from Burlington. I just want to see if I get something straight. Did you say we have just cause evictions in Vermont? There are 4 levels of it, but this amendment is about no cause evictions.
Yeah.
Okay. With a lot of questions in this area.
Individuals can be evicted for non-payment of rent. They can, if they break any of the, if they break the contract or break the rules that are within the contract, if they are committing crimes within, and then certainly if I, as an owner of a building, want my kids to move into an apartment, I can evict you in a good faith way. If I'm saying my son's going to move into that apartment and that they actually do, that's a legal eviction. And then there's on sale of building can happen. And so again, I won't go into the nuances of each of those, but that's basically off the top. Somebody can say, and most of them are not for non-payment of rent. What we see too is that, okay, you can evict somebody for criminal activity, and look at what's happening in Chittenden County in particular, but not just Chittenden County. It happens everywhere where people are known, there's a drug problem, it's like, well, we can't go in there unless something else happens. So the enforcement is different. And the ability to enforce it is different. And not part of this. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your support.
All right, that's all of it for today. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great week.